Hello and welcome back to another episode of Blurbal Reasoning, the silliest name for the most sensible show, in which I present to you a book review for The Great Hunt by Robert Jordan, second book in the Wheel of Time series. Full spoilers ahead, obviously, for book 1 and 2. First of all, it's time to read a blurb. The Forsaken are loose, the Horn of Valor has been found, and the dead are rising from their dreamless sleep. The prophecies are being fulfilled. But Randall IV, the shepherd the Aes Sedai have proclaimed as the Dragon Reborn, desperately seeks to escape his destiny. Rand cannot run forever. With every passing day, the Dark One grows in strength and strives to shatter his ancient prison, to break the wheel, to bring an end to time, and to sunder the weave of a pattern. And the pattern demands the dragon. That's the blurb as it's presented on the Amazon page for The Great Hunt, but that kind of contains some spoilers for the inside of this book. Like, the Aes Sedai don't actually proclaim Rand to be the Dragon Reborn until a few chapters into this book. Anyway, I overall thought this was a bloody fantastic book. I liked it a lot. I thought it built on the first book in a really cool way. I'll go through all the characters individually in a moment, but first and foremost, I really like the fact that the perspective kind of jumps between many different characters in this book. It feels like it has more of an actual sound structure to it, and less of a kind of haphazard feeling perspective shift as we saw in the first book, where it was all Rand and then suddenly it was a bunch of other people as well as Rand, and then it was just all Rand again. In this book you had perspectives from Rand, from Perrin, from Nynaeve, from Egwene, from some characters who are kind of peripheral in a way which reminded me of A Song of Ice and Fire in a really cool way, even though I think this came a little bit before that. As the characters branch out and explore their own kind of sections of the world, it's really cool to see more of a world being explored. That was a really redundant sentence, I'm keeping it in. You know what I mean though, we finally get to see what the White Tower is like when they go there, and we get to see what the fighting is like in Almoth Plain, or what's it fucking called, where the end of a book takes place when the Shon-Chen arrive. And if any of these pronunciations sound different to the way you pronounce it in your head, I'm just going by what Michael Kramer and Kate Redding do, because I listen to this via Audible. And once again, by the way, Michael Kramer and Kate Redding, fantastic narrators. I'm looking forward to hearing the entire series from them. It's so good. I'm worried that when I finally branch out and try other audiobooks, I won't like them as much because it's not being narrated by Michael Kramer and Kate Redding. Although, to be fair, I did listen through The Hobbit, and I don't remember who narrated that off the top of my head, but I remember enjoying that as well, so I guess I'm yet to come across a bad Audible narrator. Actually, touching on that very quickly, I saw a review for the first audiobook for The Eye of the World, which I meant to mention in the first Blurbal Reasoning video for that, where someone was complaining that they had American accents, Michael Kramer and Kate Redding, and that fantasy should only be narrated by British people. And I think that is the most stupid fucking complaint in the world. It doesn't take me out of it at all, and it almost feels like elite patriotism to say that, oh, all fantasy has to be British sounding, you know? Like, no, shut up. Other stories in other parts of the world exist, and just because they may look like they could take place in the English countryside doesn't mean they have to. Not everything has to be following the template of Lord of the Rings. Anyway, here's my unexpected rant of the video. Robert Jordan was American himself. Sorry, okay, we'll move on. So let's start with Rand. Rand in this book has to contend with the idea that he is the Dragon Reborn, something which he continues to very much be in denial of. The difference between this and the first book, obviously, is that in this book he gets told explicitly by the Amelin Seat herself that, hey, you're the Dragon Reborn. We're not going to gentle you because you're the Dragon Reborn. And while as astute readers we obviously came to that conclusion by the end of the first book, and probably sometime before then, it's still nice to see the main character deal with the explicit information. I think Robert Jordan does a great job of exploring this psyche of poor old Rand, and how he's constantly worried about going mad. A theme, by the way, which I fucking adore. While I wouldn't necessarily phrase it in as ignorant of a way as going mad in real life, I do have to say that one of my fears is succumbing to some undiagnosed mental health issue and acting. I mean, I don't think I ever would, but it's just something that's constantly in the background of my mind given what I've seen in my life. So while it's not exactly a direct one-to-one comparison, I'm in no way saying that this book explores mental health in any meaningful way. I do enjoy the theme of, just from a fantasy standpoint, of a character worried about losing their control losing control of themselves and losing their grip on reality and stuff like that, especially given Rand's perspective as a shepherd boy in a farming village where they didn't even believe that Trollocs existed, and now he's living through all of this crazy shit where it's going to be hard for him to gauge whether he's going mad or not, because he's living in such an absurd world already. I think the most fascinating thing about Rand in this book is that every single step of his journey he denies the fact that he is the Dragon Reborn, or that he is anyone of any kind of importance, that he is a lord, that he is any of these things, and yet as a reader throughout this entire book you can see him growing and changing and becoming a leader and learning to fight better and learning how to control channeling and all this kind of a thing. It is done expertly, and I can see why Robert Jordan was hailed as such a good fantasy writer. One of the ways in which he achieves this, I would say, is through the use of different perspectives, and it's not always when the characters are apart, which is obviously how it does this. At some point you see sorry, my voice went weird then. At some point you see Rand through Perrin's eyes, and that's very important because Perrin is the one who really acknowledges how much Rand has changed and points to the reader and says, look, he's more lordly now since I last saw him, he's changed. And that's really cool. That's exactly the reason why I'm so obsessed with different perspectives and the importance of showing different perspectives and what you can do by doing so. And I guess a complaint I had about the first book was that they were only used when they were apart and when it was like strictly necessary to show other sides of a story. It felt like there wasn't much care given to the idea of different perspectives. In this book, that's completely gone. Everything I like about multi-perspective storytelling is here in spades. But it isn't all about Rand. Let's talk about some of the other characters, shall we? I've got to say, while we did get some Perrin chapters and I thought it was really good to shed some more light on Rand, we didn't get a whole bunch more Perrin development. We saw him embrace his wolf talking powers. I don't remember if there's an official name for that, but we saw him embrace those powers a couple of times. We saw him finally realise that he has kind of a parallel to Rand in that they both are afraid of a power which they hold and they don't want to tell anyone about it, and they both just want to go back to the Two Rivers and go back to their respective jobs as farmers and blacksmiths. But you never really see that come to a head. Perrin never really takes Rand aside and talks to him about his powers like he says he should, and I feel like you could really strengthen the friendship by doing that. And I guess as long as we're talking about Perrin, we should probably talk about Mat as well. We never, interestingly, get a Mat perspective chapter. We only ever hear Mat's thoughts from what he directly tells us, and I would say from what we hear of Mat, we don't necessarily hear him develop much as a character in this book either. He's very much just focused on reaching the dagger to save his life. I have a feeling that's going to change going forwards. Now that he has the dagger, I think we're going to get some more Mat development in book 3. But yeah, while obviously Rand is clearly the protagonist, like the main protagonist out of all the protagonists in the story, so it's obvious that he should get more character development than the rest of them. I think Perrin and Mat got maybe slightly neglected, but not in a way that left me feeling like, oh man, just in a way that, like, when I'm reflecting on where they went as characters in this book, it's just kind of, they were just kind of along for the ride. Bit like Loyal, son of Arrant, son of I want to say Huron, but it's not Huron. I don't think I discussed Loyal in the first video, but I really like Loyal. I really like the bookish, nervous type who desperately wants to come along on an adventure but is terrified the entire time. And the way Michael Kramer voices him as well, he's like, Rand, I don't think we should be doing this. And I'm always annoyed at Rand because Rand never listens to poor Loyal and always drags him into these terrifying situations. I'm just gonna say it, Rand's a bad friend. Rand's a bad friend to Loyal. Loyal deserves better. I want to give Loyal a hug. He's a good Ogier. He's doing his best, damn it. Now the women of the book go in a very separate direction to the men, and we get to learn more about their side of a One Power and learning to be a Aes Sedai, that's the word. Before we really get to them though, I do just want to mention we do get a couple of chapters from the point of view of Moraine, which I thought was really interesting because she's very much presented as the mysterious Gandalf-style figure who holds all the knowledge of the world kind of thing. So to tell a story from her perspective for a couple of chapters definitely required some deft storytelling in a way. Like, you couldn't just have her directly think about everything she's going to do. Everything was still presented to the reader in very much vague terms, but we did learn a whole lot more about the fact that she has a plan with the Amelin seat, and that it kind of doesn't go along with everything that the Aes Sedai technically stand for, and that this plan might be something to do with unweaving well, not unweaving, but like changing the way the pattern's meant to be weaved so that it doesn't constantly go in these cycles of the world breaking and everyone dying, I guess, maybe, question mark? We get another hint at the very end of the book of this when Bart Alzamon is trying to goad Rand by talking about how he should be afraid of the Aes Sedai because they're going to take him and gentle him and try and play on his fear of that, and Rand is shocked that the Dark One has no idea about whatever the Aes Sedai are planning there. So I think that all ties together in a very interesting way, and we're going to learn more about that as we go forwards. But other than that, apart from one middle chapter and then her appearance towards the end of the book, Moiraine is largely absent from this book. I'll be interested to learn more about what she was up to during the 4-month time skip that happened later in the book, which I guess we'll discuss soon. But yeah, we got some chapters from the point of view of Egwene and Nynaeve as they got to the White Tower and experienced different kind of sides of the White Tower from the novice's point of view and from the accepted's point of view. I thought it was super interesting to see the kind of trials that an accepted has to go through to become a full Aes Sedai. Nynaeve basically had to contend with the ghosts of Christmas past, present and future, but in a really kind of dramatic and impactful way, which kind of, I wouldn't say it changed her as a person afterwards, but it's probably an experience that she's not going to forget. It's very interesting that she seems to be able to do some things in those gates that she shouldn't be able to, like channeling without coming out mad, or however that worked. There was a lot of this book, okay, I couldn't remember every single aspect, I'm sorry. I like it a lot because it takes away the kind of protagonist crown of Rand, I guess. Like in the first book, we were very much told that Rand and his friends were all ta'veren. They were very much going to be the people who brought about great change in the world and all of this. But in this book, they went through measures to be like, that doesn't mean that the other characters in our party can't also have super interesting shit going on too. For whatever reason, Nynaeve is super powerful and can do things that she shouldn't be able to do, like channel in that whatever it was called place and bring about a door a second time around, and yeah, stuff like that. Egwene didn't get quite the same level of meaningful character development. She got an arc where she was enslaved by the Shonchen, more on them later, and she got tortured for what felt like many chapters. I know it was probably just like 2 or 3, but it felt like a lot of chapters. And I discovered a new opinion that I have about fantasy epics in the reading of this novel. I'm starting to realise that authors of fantasy epics love putting in a slavery arc. Look how much shit this character is going through. Look how much they're getting tortured. They are in so much pain. And maybe it was just because I was listening to the audiobook version where I can't kind of like enhance my reading pace or whatever, or kind of like skip over some sentences. If you gasped, I'm sorry, but I'm sure you do that without realizing it sometimes. But man, in this book I just kind of realized I'm tired of just, and then they were in pain, and then they said this other thing, and this person who was being really shitty to them tortured them even more, and then they tried to be good, but that wasn't enough and they got tortured even more. I'm just tired of it. Like, just, okay, I get it. I get it. I'm not saying that slavery isn't a topic that shouldn't be brought up in books. It's definitely a horrible part of history, and I guess horribly the present day in some areas of the world, which needs to be addressed and talked about, and we need to be reminded of how horrible it is, because otherwise people are just going to turn a fucking blind eye to it. But the way it was presented in this novel, at the very least, I don't know, it gets a little bit one tone after a while. I found myself wanting to get to a chapter which had Nynaeve in it or Rand in it, just to like advance the plot instead of spending so much time talking about the various methods in which Egwene was tortured. I guess I'll be interested to see what Egwene's like in book 3 now that she's angrier as a person, but I don't know, man. That was a depressing topic, so let's talk about my favourite plot aspects of this book. The Portal Stones. Halfway through this book, Rand wakes up and he's in a different world, and it turns out that through the use of the One Power, he accidentally used a portal stone to take them into a potential parallel world, a world which might have been. And goddamn if that kind of storytelling isn't the most interesting shit. Obviously, as a storytelling device, this entire portion of the book was used to develop Rand into more of a leadership position, because he brought Hurin and Loyal there, and he felt very responsible for what happened to them, and he was going to have to lead them out of this mess that he had just led them into. From a lore perspective, though, Ooh, baby, that was some tasty lore. I love how it led back into how the ways were made, and the fact that the ways, which we saw in the first book, are kind of a utilization of a magic that made these parallel worlds to create a parallel world which enhanced travelling times between places during the Age of Legends. I love that you can see that coming together and that it makes sense within the context of the world. You know it's a good fantasy story when you feel like you're learning how magic works. I love that we saw the Grom in there, and then we see them later when the Seanchan invade, which means that you can kind of almost tell the future a little bit depending on which world you're in, because this is clearly a world in which the Seanchan have already invaded and taken over the world, and while there's no people there for whatever reason, there are Grom, and the fact that Rand has foreknowledge of a Grom before he ever learns about them in the real world kind of makes me wonder how fortune telling works in that world, how Min's powers work in that world, and if they have any kind of connection to the magic which is able to show you worlds which may or may not come to pass. I also loved the second use of the portal stone. In fact, I think that's my absolute favourite point in the book, where Rand lives hundreds of lives and we just rattle off the what ifs. Lives where he lives his entire life with Egwene, but he gets sick sometimes and he doesn't know why and his fingers fall off. Lives where Egwene dies early and he leaves the Two Rivers forever and becomes the head of a Ilion army. Lives where he isn't even born in the Two Rivers, or I guess he isn't even taken to the Two Rivers, and he lives his entire life as an Aielman. And I love what if stuff, okay? I'm very excited for Marvel's what if series to come out later this year. I love stories about the butterfly effect and multiple possibilities of parallel worlds and choices affecting which outcomes lead you to which world. I love that shit more than I love talking about how important it is to talk about perspectives and how characters see the world differently. So far, this book is ticking a lot of boxes for me. I love that Matt is afraid of Rand when he sees him after they wake up, after their 4-month stint of checking out what other lives they could be living. And he says, "You know I would never tell anyone about you, Rand." And it's like, oh, so there was a world in which I guess Rand fucking kills Matt for outing him. Oh shit. I like that Ingtar is visibly shaken after this experience as well, and it's at that point that his mask really starts to slip and we learn more about okay, let's talk about Ingtar. Ingtar comes across as this kind of standard warrior leader type who's all about honor and stuff like this, but over the course of a book he starts to kind of deteriorate and get more and more stressed about getting the horn back, and multiple people tell him that he's not following the ways of the... oh balls, too many nouns. Not Ishgard. Ishgard is Final Fantasy. Whatever their fucking people are called, it's not the way, basically, is what Huron tells him, and I think not just Huron but someone else as well. It comes up twice, the fact that he's not acting the way that he should be acting, and therefore his betrayal was very much shown beforehand and it wasn't a surprise at all. But that's good storytelling. We should be able to work out when people are going to betray people, maybe not always quite so covertly, not covertly, opposite of covertly, overtly. I never drew the line between those two words before. Wow, that's interesting, isn't it? Maybe it shouldn't always be that overt, but sometimes it should, and it should always be at least figure-outable. Oh, fucking god. This video's gone on too long, I can't speak words anymore. I would like it if we see Ingtar again. It's never explicitly said that he dies. It would be cool if he got captured or something like that. Yeah, I don't know. Let's talk about the end of this book. In the end of this book, Rand fights Baalzamon again, which, you know, I guess this is going to be a Harry Potter occurrence of fighting the bad guy at the end of every book in a different way. I don't think Baalzamon felt earned in this book. We get that chapter of him at the beginning with a man named Bors, and it's never really explicitly stated how he survived his fight with Rand, just that he did. And then you don't hear much of him until we enter the Portal Stone world, and Rand is visited by him, and they have that little conversation there. Then at the end, he just shows up. He's just there, and Rand fights him, and then in a very final seeming way, just like at the end of book 1, he seems to kill Baalzamon, just like Baalzamon seems to kill him. But lo and behold, Min finds Rand and nurses him back to health, and I'm sure Baalzamon will be back in book 3, which kind of leaves me to think, what was the point, apart from obviously what the point was. And the point was that people saw him fighting Baalzamon this time, and they made artwork about him, and they hailed him as the Dragon Reborn, and that's definitely going to be a problem in Book 3. Everyone's going to recognise Rand and think that he's the Dragon Reborn. But I guess it didn't feel earned that we got to that point. It just kind of happened in amidst the chaos of everything else happening. Nynaeve rescuing Egwene, and the guards looking for Rand and co after they've stolen back the Horn of Valir from the Seanchan, which I forgot to mention was a really cool fight scene. Sorry, there is a lot to this book. I'm sorry if I missed something. But anyway, that brings me to a criticism I have about the storytelling around Rand. Because after Min finds him, there is what can only be described as a really weird scene in which Min climbs into bed with him to share her body heat with him, but then she's talking to him like he's this lifelong love she's had, even though they've only met once. And Elaine seemingly feels the same way. Egwene obviously feels the same way, but she is the only character with who that feels earned. My issue here is that a lot of storytelling around these three characters is them talking about Rand, like giggling schoolgirls, because they've all met him. But whereas Egwene grew up with him and was kind of expected to marry him, Min and Elaine both only met him once, and in those encounters it never seemed right that they should fall for him as much as they do. I think for the most part, and granted this is also from a male perspective, but for the most part it seems like Robert Jordan writes women well. In these books they are powerful, they are more powerful than men by far. They are matriarchal in a way, like even the Two Rivers is run by the women's circle. Nynaeve I feel like is written well in her kind of like denying of her feelings towards Lan, but also the fact that those feelings are still there. It feels real, I guess. And Egwene's love for Rand feels very much earned. But in Min and Elaine, it kind of feels like it's just a power fantasy from Rand's point of view, of just he can't help the fact that all of these women love him, along with Selene, who I think has more of an actual ill intent as we learn towards the end of the book, but that's a whole different matter entirely. It seems like a theme with Rand is that he gets all the girls because he's the protagonist and he's manly, and I don't know, man, maybe that's just what it's like to be attractive or something, but it just feels a little bit off. Like, Min got weirdly possessive of Rand at the end there, and then Egwene got jealous of her, which I guess is a natural reaction, but they'd even discussed the fact that they both felt the same about Rand beforehand, and man, I don't know, it just felt weird. But yeah, then you've got the reveal at the very end of the book that Selene was that Forsaken lady who I forget the name of, but she was very heavily foreshadowed near the start of the book when Moraine was talking to the Amarlin Seat about the graffiti which was sprawled in the dungeons of the area which is not called Ishgard, because Ishgard is a Final Fantasy thing. You'll have to forgive me, I'm playing a lot of Final Fantasy XIV as well, and that's also like an epic fantasy series, so there are a lot of nouns in my head right now, and I do not remember all of them. A couple of things I still haven't really addressed. The Seanchan, they were fine, they were realistic I suppose, they were an invading force from across the sea or whatever. I guess we'll learn more about them as we go on. I didn't particularly love the fact that they were portrayed as foreigners who were overtly evil in the fact that they kept slaves and that they treated everyone really terribly and they killed ruthlessly and stuff like that. But I don't think that was necessarily a maliciously written xenophobic thing. I think it was more mirroring atrocities which have taken place in the past in history. I think it is interesting that they represent an antagonistic force as other humans instead of just creatures of the Dark One. And that Thane is very interested in them, in how he can maybe rise in their ranks and manipulate them from the top and kind of convert them into more of an overtly Dark One monster army thing of pure evilness. I've been talking for too long. Thank you for listening to this review slash reaction, because let's be honest, it's more of a reaction than an organised review. I am going to continue listening my way through this series, and I guess I will see you back here for the next one, which is called The Dragon Reborn. So I guess that's probably the one which ends up with Rand finally proclaiming himself as the Dragon Reborn. Or maybe they could pull out the rug from underneath us and have it be that Rand's just a false dragon who everyone thinks is the real dragon, but it turns out that Matt can channel. Whoa, who knows? Probably not. But I just want to throw it out there in case it happens so that I can say I called it, even though I'm not calling it next time.